The Golden Compass is a 2007 fantasy adventure film written and directed by Chris Weitz, a man who would later go on to co-write Rogue One, a Star Wars story. It is an adaptation of the first novel in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy. It was released only 2 years after Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and shared many similar traits, such as talking animals wearing suits of armor, witches, and child protagonists. However, the film garnered much controversy due to its themes of rejecting religion and challenging the authority of dogmatic religious institutions, namely the Catholic Church. This led to various boycotts, and the film writers censoring themselves, diluting the anti-religious themes, which disappointed fans. This failed to satisfy the religious communities who demonized the film. Because of this, the film has been widely summed up as Narnia for atheists. The controversy surrounding the family film greatly stunted its potential, and the rest of the trilogy was never made. So what we are left with is a single, peculiar work, the quality of which is outshined by its controversy. So let's examine this film as it is. A movie, something to be enjoyed. I have not read the source material, nor have I seen the recent TV series adaptation, so I will not be making many comparisons. They say comparison is the thief of joy, so I would rather just enjoy this film in a vacuum, for the most part. I will make some speculations based on the more obvious challenges that are commonplace for adapting a novel into a 140-minute romp. The story takes place in an alternate reality, similar to our own, with only a few distinct differences. The most notable being, human souls are not inside their consciousness, but rather they walk next to them in the form of verbal animal companions called demons. The technology of this world is retro-futuristic. We get blimps instead of planes, much like steampunk, but with a more clean and glossy aesthetic, like wagons powered by miniature stars instead of smoke-exhuming engines. The film's protagonist is Lyra Belacqua and her demon Pan, who have been raised at the secular Jordan College in Oxford, per her uncle Lord Asriel's instructions. As the film introduces us to Lyra, we see her playing with a group of children, among whom is her best friend Roger. The film does a great job characterizing Lyra, further helped by the fantastic acting of Dakota Blue Richards. Child acting is often not great, but Dakota absolutely knocks it out of the park with this role. We discover instead of a dedicated and composed student, Lyra is a little miscreant who causes mischief, rejects authority, and uses her quick wits to creatively resolve conflict. In one of my favorite scenes of the entire movie, Roger tells Lyra that she will become a lady, an idea she fearsomely rejects and forces Roger to take it back, lest they aren't best mates no more. I imagine this scene to be very relatable to any young girls watching, who too just want to be able to hang out and roughhouse with the neighbor boys without being othered for their gender identity. The way the scene plays out, Lyra's rage, followed by her self-satisfied smile once Roger takes it back, intercut with her spitting on a magistrate from their rooftop hiding place, tells us so much of Lyra's character in such a short time, which is necessary for a movie that attempts to pack quite an awful lot into a typical runtime. During her antics, Lyra and Pan find themselves spying on a conversation between a magistrate and Jack Shepherd, master of Jordan College and father figure to Lyra. I should also clarify the magisterium is an allegory for the Catholic Church, and magistrates are akin to Catholic priests, with the same gaudy garb and dogmatic values. This particular magistrate is rather peeved at the idea of Lord Asriel presenting his new scientific findings at Jordan College, as he fears such science will undermine the magisterium's control. He's so peeved, in fact, that he poisons a bottle of alcohol meant for Lord Asriel himself. Fortunately, before Lord Asriel can take a fatal sip, Lyra stops him, saving his life. She then witnesses his presentation on dust, not the kind that you clean off ceiling fans, but rather the fictional kind that can open portals to alternate dimensions. Asriel is excited about the possibility of dimensions not under the magisterium's control, to which one magistrate responds, heresy. Okay, so it's here that I gotta say, if the filmmakers diluted the anti-religious themes, then damn, what was the original content like? I mean, geez, we are only 15 minutes into the film and already we have demons, a clear bastardization of the Christian concept of the Holy Spirit, a scene of Lyra spitting on a magistrate for fun, and a religious leader attempting to murder a scientist on the brink of a discovery which threatens their totalitarian control. If the original themes have been watered down, to me it's not obvious. and I consider that a strength of the film, to make such a bold statement and to not dance around it. Next, we are introduced to Mrs. Coulter. Portrayed by the legendary Nicole Kidman, her scene is a great example of clever exposition. Clunky exposition can really take you out of it and ruin the flow, but here, Mrs. Coulter discloses some very valuable information about the Iceberg King to Lyra, as a way of gaining her trust. It's a neat way of doing some world building, characterizing Mrs. Coulter, and foreshadowing all wrapped up into one exchange of dialogue. As the scene ends, the camera pans down below the table, where we see Mrs. Coulter's mute monkey demon manhandling Lyra's demon Pan, showing that Mrs. Coulter is not being genuine with Lyra, but rather trying to control her. This is another scene I really enjoy because of its efficiency in conveying so much so quickly. The movie does struggle with some unfortunate pacing issues, but these are more unavoidable symptoms of adapting a lengthy novel into a tight hour and a half. It's obvious the filmmakers put in great effort to remedy this issue with brilliant scenes such as this. So Mrs. Coulter convinces the master of Jordan College to take Lyra with her to the land of the ice bears, but not before the master secretly gives Lyra an alethiometer, also known as a golden compass. He tells her that this instrument allows her to discern the truth of the matter and that it's of the utmost importance she not let Mrs. Coulter know she has it. Before they depart, we are shown a rather frightening scene where Lyra's friends are captured by the Gobblers. The Gobblers are established from the beginning scene of Children Playing as a mysterious group who kidnaps children for some nefarious purpose. So Mrs. Coulter whisks Lyra and Pan away in her fancy retro-futuristic airship to London, which first Lyra greatly enjoys, but later becomes disillusioned and realizes Mrs. Coulter's true, cruel, and dominating nature. Lyra does some snooping and discovers Mrs. Coulter is in charge of the Gobblers. So she flees Mrs. Coulter's mansion into the industrial district. Quick side note, I like the establishing shot of the industrial district, with the passing train both conveying the change of scenery but also emphasizing the anxiety of the situation. There's a lot of great transitions in a film that is constantly changing scenery. This too at least helps to partially mend the issue of its rapid pace. So Lyra and Pan are captured, but then, thoop! Her captor is pierced by an arrow and fucking dies. When I first saw this, I was like, holy shit, people get straight up murdered in this kid's film. They are pulling no punches here. But who loosed the arrow? Well, that would be the Egyptians. Oh boy, let's talk about it. So I'm not 100% comfortable saying the word Egyptian, as it's derived from the racial slur gypsy, a derogatory term used to falsely categorize the Roma people. Much like how the Native Americans were falsely presumed to be Indians from India, the Romani were falsely identified as Egyptian, which is where we get the term gypsy. Egyptian, the canonical name for the seafarer people of his Dark Materials trilogy, seems even worse than saying gypsy, as it's even more similar to Egyptian. And though the Roma-inspired peoples of this fictional world are good guys and portrayed in a positive light, they are still portrayed as stereotypes and cast mostly of white people, an unfortunate case of cultural appropriation. To quote an article by Katie Burt from denofgeek.com, this is an erasure of culture and community that has a history of being forced into the margins in real life, while simultaneously having their culture essentialized and co-opted in mainstream culture. The fact is, I'm sure at least some of you watching weren't even aware gypsy was a derogatory term for a real-world people, and not just a term meant to convey a certain lifestyle. I myself didn't find this out until a few years ago when I first played the video game Psychonauts, so don't misinterpret this as an attack. Now that we both know, I'm going to refrain from using the term resembling the slur, and just Roma-inspired people instead. If for some reason that bothers you, then you're bothered by the wrong things, my friend. Language evolves just as people do, and being considerate of a marginalized group of people isn't woke culture, it's just being considerate. I digress. So, okay, the Romani save Lyra and take her aboard their ship, where the captain reveals they are pursuing the Gobblers, making their way to the north to either rescue the children, get revenge, or both. They state no one has been affected more by the Gobblers than them, which again I find to be a surprisingly realistic and harrowing detail in this kid's film. The fact that the oppressed non-white people would be victimized more than their privileged neighbors. This is the film trying to point at a real-life problem, albeit still being rather problematic in its own right, with the fact that the Roma-inspired people in this universe are primarily white people. It's here on the ship we see Lyra use her intelligence to successfully operate the Golden Compass, something that no one else can seem to do. We also get a cool little action sequence of some robotic bugs attacking Lyra, to which she defeats and captures one in a container. Also during their voyage, a friggin' witch lands on the ship, and she tells Lyra the children are being held at Bolvangar and guarded by Tatar mercenaries. What I love about this scene, however, is the clever and immersive cinematography. See, in any other film, we'd simply get some shots of Bolvangar, the children, and the Tatar mercenaries with the witch's dialogue overdubbed. But here instead, there's this cool sort of eye-closing transition that shows us these places, while transitioning back and forth to the actual conversation taking place between Lyra and the witch. This seems to convey that while Lyra is blinking, she is literally seeing these places, while talking to the witch. It's such a subtle but really cool trick that shows how much thought was put into this scene. When the filmmakers could have just done the typical method, they opted to get creative and keep the audience more immersed into Lyra's perspective. So cool. This sort of thought and care is consistent throughout the entire movie, which shows that this is much more than just a lazy adaptation, a cheap cash grab. It was actually made with some love and care, if not for the source material, at least for film as a medium itself. You can really tell when a director was passionate and when a director was just getting the job done. The Golden Compass is a work of passion. Lord Asriel reaches Svalbard, the kingdom of the Ice Bears, and then boop, is captured by mercenaries hired by Mrs. Coultier and is pretty much never seen in the movie again. You would think because he's played by Mr. James Bond that he'll play a bigger role, but not really. Though I appreciate the captured princess trope being subverted in this way. Now Lyra has to rescue her uncle as well as the kidnapped children. Our protagonists reach some sort of port town and prepare to continue their travels inland on foot. It's here in this town we finally get to meet the film's best characters besides Lyra herself, Lee Scoresby, a rootin' tootin' aeronaut Texan portrayed by the iconic Sam Elliott, and Lorik Bernjonsson, an armored polar bear portrayed by acting heavyweight Ian McKellen. The two are buddies, but Lorik has fallen to alcoholism and depression because the local townspeople tricked him out of his armor, which, fun fact, is made out of meteor metal, making it pretty much irreplaceable. There's another great scene here as Lyra refuses to let the bear intimidate her. She calls him out on his bullshit, commanding respect, then uses the Golden Compass to uncover the stolen armor's location, that being the local church. Lorik reclaims his armor from the church while also destroying the building. Again, not much subtlety here, but I honestly love the blatant disrespect. Very badass. Lorik and Scoresby vow to help Lyra, and we finally got our gang together. It's at this point that the movie is just plain silly, but in the best way possible. We got a quippy steampunk cowboy, a talking polar bear with meteor armor, teaming up with seafarers to help a little girl rescue her friends. It's such a big swing, and I love it. It's just a shame that it takes the film nearly an hour to get to this point, and once it does, the pace only speeds up more, which robs us of really getting to establish these characters' relationships with each other. The film would have greatly benefited from a director's cut. Adding a mere 20 minutes could have done so much. We really needed to see our characters just spend a little more downtime with each other, conversing and what have you. This would have made the action-packed third act much more meaningful. There's also groups of people, like the Tatar mercenaries, that we know nothing about, other than the fact that they're bad guys. A little more world-building exposition could have gone a long way. This is a film that is just begging to be given a 2-hour runtime. At least, in my opinion, there's no wasted screen time, no filler. Even the different action set pieces happen pretty quickly, so it's hard to imagine how they could have paced this film any better with the tight runtime they were forced to adhere to. Take, for example, Scoresby, who only has a few lines in the movie, but makes the most of them. There's a joke where Scoresby says, "I'm supposed to die in a rocking chair, not in a hydrogen fire." I love this joke because it's not just a funny joke, but also tells us about Scoresby's character. He isn't like Lorik, who would prefer to die in the throes of battle, but rather he's a man who seeks peace and finds himself fighting in battles because he wants to stand up for what's right. Again, very efficient screenwriting. So now our gang arrives in the Arctic, which is home of the Ice Bears, as well as the experimental facility that kidnapped children are being held captive. I've had a lot of good things to say about this film up until this point, but unfortunately I gotta be honest and say the quality dips from this point forward, because of one reason. That being the fact that snowy landscapes are horribly uninteresting from a cinematic perspective, and this particular Arctic looks like dog shit. It's no coincidence, once our big CGI character is introduced, that the majority of remaining scenes take place in dark, snowy atmospheres, which helps to hide all the little imperfections of the 2007 CGI. Maybe some viewers enjoy snow, but anytime a movie takes place in a snow-dominant landscape, my disinterest skyrockets. There's just nothing visually appealing on screen. Up until this point, we've seen retro-futuristic cities, pirate ships, and academic campuses brimming with personality. But all these dimly lit scenes masked by flurries of snow just doesn't give much to the viewer to grasp onto. With The Golden Compass, it's particularly obvious how many of these scenes were just shot on a flat soundstage with green screen. There's no dynamic terrain or architecture. It's all unfortunately very boring. This third act, of course, is where the majority of action takes place, but because of the poor visibility, it can be hard to tell who's who, as well as appreciate the choreography of the action. One nice detail, at least, is the fact that when anyone dies, their demon explodes into a flurry of golden dust, which is also very morbid, as the film is clearly conveying these people are straight up dying, not just being knocked unconscious like in other family-friendly films. So our heroes set up camp, and Lyra and Lorik sneak away to investigate a shack nearby. Here they discover piles of dead demons, as well as the Romani friend Billy Costa, who no longer has his demon. He has undergone a process known as intercision, which is what is happening at the experimental facility. Stakes successfully raised. Soon after, Lyra and Pan are captured and taken to the Castle of the Ice Bears. One thing I've breezed past is Lorik's beast story, and that's because the film breezes right past it as well. See, Lorik is actually the rightful heir to the throne of his kingdom, but was defeated in combat by the current king. He then comes to rescue Lyra, and combined with Lyra's clever manipulation, defeats the king in single combat, rescuing Lyra and reclaiming the throne. The problem here is this entire B-plot is introduced and then quickly resolved mere minutes afterwards. They either should have introduced us to Lorik earlier, or had this scene take place later in the film, because everything happens so quickly, it doesn't really pay off emotionally at all for me. We don't really spend much time with Lorik as an exile before he becomes king again, and so there's not much of a feeling of victory or change. It really feels like Lorik shouldn't regain the title of king until the second or third movie, so we can really empathize with him and understand why it sucks being in exile in the first place. Plus, as soon as he wins and becomes king, there's no celebration or falling action telling us what that really means, because he just has to rush Lyra off back to the main plot. I understand the filmmakers probably didn't want to meddle with the source material too much, and I'm sure there was pressure from studio execs to have the Ice Bear battle, to really appeal to those Narnia nerds who were thirsty for more CGI animal violence. But the story would have been more effective had not everything happened so quickly. One thing I do really like about this scene, however, is how Lorik achieves victory. In classic movie fashion, he is losing the battle against the corrupt king when the king decides to brag and taunt Lorik, slapping him around and shouting, "Is that all? Is that all?" What absolutely shocked me wasn't Lorik's victory, but the fact that he kills the king by swiping the bear's jaw clean off. It's fucking brutal. Just slices the dude's head in half as his jaw goes flying towards the camera. I love this scene, not for its brutality, but because the kill shot was only possible by the king exposing his jaw when he's yelling at Lorik. So Lorik doesn't win with brute force, but by being clever and opportunistic. He's not the toughest bear around, but his composure and humility won him the battle. A nice touch. If only the rest of the scene involving two CGI blobs mashing against each other didn't look like total dog shit. Lorik takes Lyra to the experimental station where the two are separated via crossing an ice bridge. Lyra reunites with Roger before being captured and placed inside a device for intercision. Before the process can be complete, however, Mrs. Coulter interrupts and saves Lyra. She then explains to Lyra that she is her mother, and Lyra then discerns that her uncle Azrael is actually her father. Mrs. Coulter demands Lyra give her the alethiometer, but Lyra tricks her by giving her the container with the mechanical insect instead. Lyra escapes, destroys the intercision device, and frees the captive children. Now we are ready for the big final battle. Quick note first, I like the complexity of Mrs. Coulter's character. There's a really dark scene earlier where Mrs. Coulter slaps her demon monkey across the room and then immediately comforts the monkey saying, "I'll never hurt you." I thought it was bold to include such a realistic portrayal of child abuse, and this scene also tells us a lot about Mrs. Coulter. She's not just an evil stepmom character, she is someone who convinces herself she's doing the right thing. She's angry at herself for not being able to control Lyra and for losing her in the first place. Not only is this scene a depiction of abusing others, but it is, in a way, a depiction of self-harm, emphasizing Mrs. Coulter's confusion and hatred of herself. I haven't read into what happens in the subsequent entries, but there seems to be a hint that maybe Mrs. Coulter will have a change of heart. So, the final battle. The most Narnia moment of all. I wish this final battle was more satisfying, but it's held back by a few factors. For one, the entire fight takes place on a single flat surface of ice and snow during the night. It's small, simple, and the visuals make it hard to discern what's really going on. It also repeats the classic trope of, oh no, the bad guy has the good guy cornered, the bad guy is preparing for the death blow, and then wham! The good guy is saved the last second by a different protagonist who just joined the battle. They do this like 4 times in a row, to the point where it's kind of funny to watch. Besides that, there are some cool moments. The witches flying around with their bows that resemble broomsticks is kind of cool, and even though the whole battle is pretty mediocre, it still invoked an emotional reaction from me, getting to see Scoresby, Mama Costa, and the witch lady all fighting together to save the children. If only this took place during the daytime or on a different biome, because it just doesn't look great when everything is all dark and muddled. After the battle, our gang, now joined by Lyra's best friend Roger, board Scoresby's aeroship and continue their quest to save Lord Asriel. Roll credits. The first time I watched this movie, it was kind of an okay experience. Didn't really feel like anything special, but not a bad movie. However, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The film lingered in my mind, and so I watched it a second time and really enjoyed my second watch. When I watched it again to grab screenshots for this review, I grew a new appreciation for how much thought was put into the cinematography. They really try to make the most out of every scene and do a great job of keeping you rooted in Lyra's perspective. The camera pans up at adults and becomes closer and more intimate during the exchanges between Lyra and her demon Pan. The voice acting for Pan is pretty good too, and the audio engineering really helped to convey Pan as a small, hushed voice coming up from the ground instead of a booming, room-filling voice like that of Lorik. The biggest weakness of the film is one that just can't be avoided. It's supposed to be the first part in a trilogy. There's a lot of setup. Many ideas need to be introduced to the audience in a way that isn't just haphazard info dumping, but that seems natural, and for the most part, the film succeeds at this. But by the end of the movie, personally, I'm pumped to see what our lovable cast of characters is going to do next, as opposed to having a sense of closure or finality. I want to know more about Dust, about Scoresby, Mrs. Coulter, and Lord Asriel. The movie succeeds at setting up the story and attracting your interest. It's just a shame that's where it ended. It's rather disappointing. I suppose I could watch the show or read the books, which I've been told are better, but at this point it would be an odd adjustment to make since I'm accustomed to this iteration of the characters. I still think the movie stands on its own, and for a kids' film, rated PG-13, it's pretty damn good. It takes a lot of bold risks and wild swings that I personally believe pay off. Lyra is an incredibly enduring character, and her performance alone is enough to keep my attention. One thing I forgot to mention, it appears that everybody's demon is actually the opposite gender, which would mean each person in this world is actually non-binary, which is a cool detail I didn't notice until my third viewing. Lastly, I think the comparisons to Narnia have probably hurt this film's reputation. Narnia is Christian propaganda, a film meant to guilt and shame you into believing in Jesus. Golden Compass is a film about free thinking, about opposing authority and fighting for truth. It's not really fair to call this film the atheist Narnia, as this film is more anti-religion than it is anti-spirituality, and the Narnia parallels are more on a level of surface aesthetics and not really present in the heart or soul of this film. Still, that's what my thumbnail says because it paints a close enough picture and captures your attention. I can't really think of a graceful ending for this review, so I'll simply say that I recommend watching this movie. Whether it's with the fam or by yourself, there's enough here for even the snootiest of cinephiles to appreciate. I'm Newt Grundy. Feel free to comment below if you have anything you want to say about the Golden Compass, and give the video a like because it really does help my channel.